Shalom, everyone. Parshat Shavua with Reb Shlomo Carlebach from the book Evan Shlomo. For those who have it, we're starting on page 307. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight. Up to now, in each Parsha, Reb Shlomo has 8, 10, 12, 15 different Torah insights. And the same with this Parsha. This Parsha is particular full. We're doing Parshat Chukat. As I've explained, that what we're reading in Israel is different than what people are reading outside of Israel. And so this coming week, outside of Israel, you'll be reading Parshat Chukat. We read it already this Shabbos. So those who are watching this from Eretz Yisrael, this is like a review of this past Shabbat. And for those outside of Israel, this is an introduction to this week's Torah portion. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. On page 307, he has a fairly long explanation here. And usually I just pick parts of even one. But when I read through this, I had this feeling of what it was like when we were actually with Reb Shlomo when he was teaching. Because usually when it was, whether in Shabbos or mostly, let's say during the week, the teachings would last for hours. And the way it worked is he would begin with music, we'd sing, he'd tell over Torah. There was always a story or many stories with whatever Torah he's giving over. Then we'd play more music and then more Torah. And that's how the whole evening would go. On Shabbos, of course, it was more broken up throughout the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this whole one. I haven't done this yet. It's like maybe 4 pages in the book. I'll comment on it, but the reason I wanted to do it again is to give people more of a feeling of the continuity of how he was teaching. Again, we've been doing more small parts of different pieces. So this is called markings. And as I've been doing, I do my best to actually read the text because the people who edited this tried their best to keep it to the way that Reb Shlomo would actually speak, the way he gave over the Torah, instead of editing it like very thoroughly so that it would be like the usual kind of book style. Here it's more trying to stay true to the actual way he spoke. Okay, so here we go. What is the deepest relationship in the world? If I tell you I like this person very much because of a certain reason, how deep is that? If you tell me that you have 10 reasons why you are a Jew, I wouldn't give an onion for that kind of Yiddishkeit. Because I can give you 100 reasons why you shouldn't be a Jew. In other words, Reb Shlomo is saying here very obviously that love has to go beyond like a checklist of I love this person because of X, Y, and Z. He's saying, like, what kind of relationship is that? If you give me 10 reasons why you like Israel, I'll give you 100 reasons why to like Acapulco more. Why go vacation in Mexico more than Yerushalayim? Now he quotes from this, the beginning of this Torah, Zot Chukat Torah. This is the decree of the Torah. Here, this kind of decree is a decree that supersedes human logic. The mitzvah of the red heifer is one of the laws that has no reason. Really what he means, it's not that it doesn't have a reason. It doesn't have a reason that has been revealed to us. It's mysterious. It's almost, it transcends human logic. He continues, in Hebrew, the word for taste and reason are the same word, ta'am. So to have a taste of something means that we have an inkling of what the reason is for it. I want you to open your hearts. God says to Moshe, V'yichu elecha, take to you, meaning the people should bring to you, Moshe should take to you this red heifer. The Midrash in Bamidbar Rabbah says that God was saying to Moshe Rabbeinu that he is the only one who knows the tam, the reason for the red heifer. According to tradition, Moshe was the only person who really understood the Parah Adumah, the red heifer, how the red heifer purifies from the impurity of death, but it makes those that administer the ashes of the red heifer, makes them impure. We're told that even Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon, the wisest of all people, wrote that he did not understand this mitzvah. But why is the Midrash trying to give a reason for this? Do you think Moshe Rabbeinu needs a reason to do what God wants him to do? What kind of a God would God be if he had to give me, a human being, a reason? In other words, if you look carefully in the Torah, except for really a handful of mitzvot, they're never explained in the Torah. They're never explained why we have this mitzvah. Now, some of them are obvious, that you're supposed to put a guardrail around your roof so someone doesn't fall off, that you can't dig a pit in a public place because someone might fall in. Now, the Torah doesn't go to length to explain, but in almost every case, the mitzvot are not explained. It's not explained exactly why we wear tefillin, why we do all of these things. And so Reb Shlomo is just pointing out, here we have a tradition that God explained to Moshe the reason for the Parah Adumah. But Reb Shlomo is saying, why is the Midrash trying to give a reason for this? Did Moshe Rabbeinu need a reason to follow what God was telling him? I want you to open your hearts. The tree of knowledge is the downfall of the world. I know this is right and this is wrong. This is good and this is bad. If the whole world knows what is right and what is wrong, why is the world in such bad shape? The problem of the world is not that they don't know that they shouldn't kill. Knowledge is good for a PhD. But we're talking about inside stuff. I can know everything and still it doesn't help at all. What is the tree of life all about? Chukat, again, that's the name of the decree. Zot Chukat Torah. This is the decree of the Torah. So Reb Shlomo is now going to explain, really according to Chassidut, what the root of this word chok means, this type of decree. So he says, Chukat means that when something is carved into me, it makes a mark on me. Now remember, this whole piece is called markings. So in other words, when something gets very deep inside of me, it makes a mark. It leaves an impression. Not a sad kind of mark, like a tattoo, the most beautiful kind of mark. If you meet a girl and like her very much, but the next day you don't remember her name, she didn't mark you on your insides. When you meet your soulmate, the mark is so deep. Now, here's something I've pointed out many times, that when Reb Shlomo, I wouldn't say in the beginning, but when he started to collect a large gathering of people around him, it was in the mid to late 60s. And he was talking mostly to single people in their late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, mostly not married. And so in so many Torahs, he talks about a boy meeting a girl, because that's who he was talking to. But later, most of those people got married, had children, but he still continued to use that kind of parable, this idea of a boy meets a girl. So that's what he just said here. It's like if you meet someone, you like them very much, but the next day you can't even remember their name. So how deep of an impression did it really make? But if you meet your soulmate, then the mark, the impression goes so deep. So Reb Shlomo continues, Paris is beautiful. Rio de Janeiro is beautiful. It doesn't leave a mark in your heart, though. Is there a Jew in the world whose soul isn't full of marks from Yerushalayim, the holy city? If I buy the New York Times and I carry it around with me, nothing happens to me. If I carry a Gemara, Gewalt, does it make a mark on my heart? This marking causes an empty space inside of us, and it needs to be filled. And here is the deepest depths. After something marks you, do you know what God does to fill it with? He gives you a taste. You can keep Shabbos for 10,000 years and not have a taste of Shabbos. But if Shabbos marks you, you get a taste of Shabbos, and it's another world. This was one of Reb Shlomo's main themes. He used it about Shabbos, but other mitzvot also. In other words, you can keep the mitzvot for 10,000 years, but the question is, how deep is it getting inside you? How much is it changing you? How much is it enlightening you? He says, I know a lot of people who have children, and their children never touch their hearts. So according to the law, they are these children's parents. So what? Sometimes people have children and they touch their hearts so deep, then God blesses them to have that taste of their children. Every human being has a different taste. Everything in the world has a taste. Does God ever do anything which doesn't have a taste? Every country, every holiday, every Shabbos has a different taste. Every moment of your life has a different taste, but you only taste it when it touches you. So I hope everyone is catching like the flow here, how he's like kind of flowing from one idea to another. So God says to Moshe, since you never tasted from the tree of knowledge, you are the one to taste this. Because Moshe was a unique human being. He was a unique prophet. So Reb Shlomo is saying is as if he never tasted the tree of knowledge. And that's why he could understand the reason for the Parah Adumah. Sometimes you meet people who know everything, but not one thing marks their soul. Listen when he says, they are so ugly. They have no taste. The tree of knowledge has no taste at all. If God forbid you sink your teeth in, you spit it out fast. A lot of times you meet people, and there's nothing there. You are still hungry after you meet them because they have no taste. Sometimes a person tells you all about Shabbos and you know all the laws, but it doesn't leave one tiny imprint on your soul. But sometimes you taste one bit of Shabbos and you mamish can't wait for the next Shabbos. Do you know why? Because the tree of life tastes so good. Again, that's why I picked this Torah. It's very typical of the flow from one idea to the other, and how Reb Shlomo was always trying to get to the depths. Anything that was superficial, like Reb Shlomo couldn't stand it. You had to get to the depths. You had to be touched by something. You had to be able to taste the essence of something. He continues, a dead person is someone who is not touched by anything. Can you put a mark on a stone? Remember the prophet Yechezkel, in God's name, says, in the future, I will take away your heart of stone and I'll give you a heart of flesh. That is a metaphor for the difference between, let's say, before Mashiach and after Mashiach. So he says, can you put a mark on a stone? A newspaper can say that 6 million Jews were killed, and then I just turn to the next page. I can read that 10,000 kids died in one day from hunger while I was chewing on a hamburger, and then turn to the next page. Why didn't you fall to the floor and cry? Do you know why God didn't make a covenant with Noach? Now, God did make a covenant with Noach, but it was more with nature, that there wouldn't be another flood. It wasn't so much with Noach, the person, like God made a covenant with Avraham. So he says he was pretty holy. The Torah itself says so. But when God told him that the whole world will be destroyed, he didn't cry. It didn't leave a mark on him. When God said to Avraham Avinu, I'm destroying the most evil city in the world, he was suddenly full of marks. So he starts davening, please, master of the world, don't do this. I'm begging you. So here, Reb Shlomo is pointing out with many commentaries, they compare Noach to Avram. That Noach did everything that God told him. And he was certainly righteous enough that humanity was saved through him. But as many commentaries say, why didn't he beg Hashem not to do this, not to bring a flood on the world? And here, Avraham Avinu, God says he's destroying the most evil city in the world, and Avram's praying to God not to do it. A dead person is someone who isn't touched by anything. If God forbid you are in touch with a dead body, it means you have a touch of death inside of you. You are not fit for the holy temple. So here he's bringing it back to the Torah portion. The whole flow of this parsha begins that the idea of the red heifer, because to go to the temple, you had to be in a state of purity. And if you had been in contact with the dead or in contact with someone who was in contact with the dead, you are called impure from the tumat met, from the impurity of death. And so you had to go through this procedure of the ashes of the Parah Adumah. So Reb Shlomo is saying, if God forbid you are in touch with the dead body, it means you have a touch of death inside of you. You are not fit for the holy temple. So in a certain way, he's giving a reason why a person has to be purified before they can come to the temple. The mystery is how is it that the ashes of the Parah Adumah with a red string and a little bit of hyssop and a cedar branch, that is what purifies you, and the ones who are purifying you become impure. And here I want you to open your hearts. You know what ashes are? Do you think ashes are dead? Ashes are not dead. Ashes are the leftover marks. In other words, when you have a bonfire and after a few hours, all that's left is the ash, but the ash contains the essence of those logs that were burning a few hours ago. So that's what Reb Shlomo says. When it comes to the ashes, ashes are not dead. Ashes are the leftover marks. When it comes to the ashes of the 6 million, Gewalt, are they alive? Do you know how many people's lives are ashes? Nothing grows anymore, and you give up hope. But real living water fills those markings, and suddenly those marks purify the world. Because remember, the ashes of the Parah Adumah, along with the hyssop and the cedar and the red string, they're mixed with living waters. And so here he's saying something very, very deep. The 6 million ended up quite literally being ash. But for us, those ashes are alive. Their memory is alive. The saying, never again, is the living testimony of the remembrance is still alive. If only we could pick up all of these markings from our forefathers. Do you know what they left us? Do you think they just left us books? They left us so many marks. Again, marks means an impression on the soul. The deepest, most beautiful, most awesome marks. That's what our patriarchs, our matriarchs, all of the righteous people through the generation. Now he's going to tell a story. So this is so typical, and it's not a short story, but if you ever heard a story from Reb Shlomo, you could hear it 10 times, and each time it just moves you. So I'm going to read it, because again, these are the words more or less that he gave it over. And at first you might, the obvious connection here is because he just said, like, what did our ancestors leave us? Okay, so now he says, and here is the story. In Hungary lived one of the greatest rabbis, Reb Mordechai Winkler. He was a chief rabbi in the city of Mad. This is told by his grandson. So in other words, the story he's going to tell, I assume that he heard it or he read it, and the grandson of this rabbi is the one who's told the story. So the grandson says like this: my grandfather was so illustrious. He was always surrounded by people. I wanted so much to be close to him. I just never had a chance. In the meantime, my grandfather was already 89 years old. It doesn't say how old the grandson is here in the story, but we're assuming it's like kind of like an early teenager. That's what I imagine. One day, my grandfather said to me, I want you to come with me on a trip for 2 days. From Mad, we'll travel to Pishtian, a summer resort. We will be there for 2 days, and then we'll come back. I will tell you why we're going to Pishtian on the train ride there. So the grandson continues telling his story. It was so good to be alone with my grandfather. Every second was so beautiful. Here my holy grandfather began to tell me. Now the grandfather is telling him why he's taking him to this place for 2 days. So the grandfather says, my parents were very poor, simple people. Since the age of 5, I was studying the Talmud, and I knew so many tractates by heart. When I was 9 years old, I told my parents, it's beautiful to be with you, but here in the village, there's no one to learn from. At that time, the biggest yeshiva in the world was in Pressburg, with the Heiliger Chasam Sofer. I was 9 years old. It was a different world. So my parents gave me their blessing, a lot of bread, and all kinds of addresses. The whole journey was mapped out for me from my village until I got to Pressburg, and every Yidla I would stay with along the way. And everyone knows that something happens to you when you're on the way, on a journey. You feel infinite because you're not limited by a house. Every night I stayed somewhere else, and the whole time I was going over the tractates of Gemara I knew by heart. Remember, he's 9 years old here, and he knows tractates of the Gemara by heart. On my way, I passed by Pishtian. Now remember, that's the place that he's taking his grandson, to this place called Pishtian. It was awesomely beautiful there, a summer resort. Everyone was staying in hotels. I thought to myself, I also need a vacation, but I need a hotel and I have no money. So I walked around in the park and I laid on a bench. It became my hotel. I sat there all day, slept there at night. I went over the whole tractate of Gittin while I was sitting there. Those 2 days in Pishtian were the holiest days of my life. Just me and God. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody paid attention to me. I was learning God's word. It was so beautiful. Now I'm already old. I hope to live forever, but I want to go back there with you, my grandson, to Pishtian to sit on that bench one more time. Such a beautiful story already. So now now it's back to the grandson is telling the story. So the grandson says, my heart sunk. He is 89 now, so he thinks those old benches are still there after 80 years. I was afraid my grandfather was going senile, as there was no way we'd be able to find this bench. I was actually dreading tomorrow morning he will be so broken, but I didn't say anything. So Reb Shlomo now says, open your hearts, friends. We arrived at the park, and I saw all those benches were new benches. My holy grandfather starts walking further into the park, and there is the bench. All the benches were new benches, but his bench was still there. I couldn't believe it. This was the holiest moment of my life. I'm sitting with my grandfather on this bench, his little hotel, when he was 9 years old. Gewalt, it was so beautiful. We sat there for 2 days, and then we left. Obviously, my grandfather knew his days were numbered, as 2 days later, he passed away. Open your hearts again. After being with my grandfather on the bench, can you imagine how much I miss him? After the Shiva was over, I decided there was no other place for me. I had to go to the bench. I went back to Pishtian, but the bench wasn't there. Couldn't find the bench. So Reb Shlomo says, what a story. I bless us to find our grandparents' bench. And whenever you look for it, it should still be there. These benches are full of markings. Gewalt, does it taste good? In order to be a real Yid, Yiddishkeit has to touch you. Unless it touches you, you will never taste it. It's, it's not a taste of bagel and lox. It's a taste of the tree of life. It has to reach into the innermost, deepest depths of your soul. We should have the privilege that everything holy and real should touch us so deep. The deeper the mark is, the more God fills us with this heavenly taste. So that's this whole Torah that I wanted to give over. And I hope everyone got a taste of what it was like to be with Shlomo from hearing like the flow here. And this is really the way he talked. He would always say it has to reach into the innermost, deepest depths of your soul. That's how he always talked. Anyways, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm not crying a physical tear, but I came very close, very close, just giving this over. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the beginning of Chukat, for those who have the book, back to page 293. Okay, so this is called the Zohar's Hakdama, the introduction from the Zohar. Zot Chukat Torah. So he's quoting from the first words of this parsha. Zot Chukat Torah. So Reb Shlomo says the Zohar Kodesh says, and then he quotes in the Aramaic, says Milin deoraisa Kadishin inon, ila'a inon, mesikin inon. So how do we translate that? You have to know that every word of the Torah is very holy. Every word is very high. That's literally what the Zohar says. It's ila'a. It's high. And every word is very sweet. So it's so perfect because this is how Reb Shlomo would talk. But here he's revealing to us, it says this in the Zohar. So when Reb Shlomo would always use the idea of being holy, of being high, and being sweet, it's right from the Zohar. So Reb Shlomo says like this: we should give over to every Yid that they are very high, very holy, and very sweet. In other words, not just that the Torah is high, holy, and sweet, but you, the person I'm talking to, is high, holy, and sweet. Eventually, we should be privileged to turn on the world to being elated, holy, and sweet. It is heartbreakingly beautiful. It's the essence of everything. And this is really what Reb Shlomo tried to teach us. This is what he tried to do. He quite literally went all over the world. He met in his lifetime literally millions of people. He wanted to just meet everyone. It's no accident that he passed away on a plane, because he was always traveling from one place to the other for another event, another Shabbat, another holiday, another concert. And this was his message. Eventually, we should be privileged to turn on the world to being elated, holy, and sweet. In one sentence, that was Reb Shlomo's mission in the world. And I should mention that last week was the 32nd yurtzeit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And this also was the Rebbe's mission in the world. And that's why he sent shluchim to literally every corner of the world in order to share the holiness, the highness, and the sweetness of the Torah. And of course, Reb Shlomo was pretty much the Rebbe's first shliach. So it's not a coincidence that they shared the same mission, and it's not a coincidence that they passed away 3 months from each other. No coincidence at all. This coming November will be Reb Shlomo's 32nd yurtzeit, 3 months later, after the Rebbe passed away, approximately. Wait, Thomas, Tishrei. Yeah, almost exactly 3 months. 3.5 months, actually. Okay, the next Torah is on page 294. It's called Dust and Ashes. So here, again, the idea, the ashes of the Parah Adumah. That's why in the long Torah we learned, he brought up ashes a number of times, because it's connected to the idea of the ashes of the Parah Adumah. Reb Shlomo says like this: when we learn the portion of the week, we see that the Parah Adumah is likened to the Jewish people. T'mima asher lo alecha ol. It never had anyone but God. Okay, so it says about this Parah Adumah, not only did it have every hair had to be red, but it also could never have had a yoke on it, ever. And so he's saying that the Parah Adumah in a certain way is connected to the Jewish people, because the only yoke that we have never had a yoke of anyone else but God. That's what's called Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. V'hotziota el michutz l'machaneh. And then it says that this whole procedure, also very unique, because it was not done in the temple. And he shall take it outside the camp. Again, this is when they were living in the desert. But even in the temple in Jerusalem, the Parah Adumah was not done in the temple. It was done outside of the temple. It's another very unique thing about the Parah Adumah. So Reb Shlomo says the Ribono Shel Olam takes Yidden out from Eretz Yisrael. We may not have known what this meant for hundreds of years, but Gewalt, now we know. In other words, what he's saying, that in the Torah, when the Torah was given, and it says you shall take the Parah Adumah outside of the camp. So Reb Shlomo was saying that was an illusion, because the Parah Adumah is somewhat compared to the Jewish people, that was a hint that eventually the Jewish people would end up in exile outside of the camp, outside of Israel. And he said that maybe in the beginning we didn't understand, well, what's the connection? Why does it have to be outside the camp? And then he says, but Gewalt, do we know it now? After being in exile for 2,000 years, now we understand what it means. Then it says, but eventually it says, V'yasaf ish tahor. And then it says that someone who is pure gathers up the ashes. One day when Mashiach is coming, the Ribono Shel Olam will gather all the ashes. So again, here he's alluding to the ashes of the 6 million. Again, we have to know that this was a constant theme in Reb Shlomo's teachings and in his concerts, because he did many concerts in Europe, all over Europe, and especially in Germany and Austria, because he spoke a fluent German. That was his first language. And so, especially when he was in Europe, especially when he was in Israel, the image of the 6 million was never far away from any of his teachings. So that's what he says. One day when Mashiach is coming, the Rabbanu Shalom will gather all the ashes. We should live to see it. Reb Tzadok Cohen says that when Avraham Avinu prayed for Sodom, it was the first prayer in the Torah. Now, this is a very, very important thing, is that according to Chassidut, when Avram is, actually Rashi brings it, is it says that Avram approached God, and then it sounds like a negotiation. God, how can you do this? If there are 50 righteous people, if there are 40, 30, but the Rashi brings it that when it says that he approached God, Rashi shows that language, Hagasha, is approaching in prayer. And so Reb Shlomo loved this idea that this is the first prayer mentioned in the Torah. We don't see anyone else praying before Avraham Avinu. And so why? It's because of this prayer that Lot was saved. And Mashiach comes from him. Strangely enough, Mashiach comes through the illicit relationship that Lot had with his daughter. Again, a great mystery. After that prayer, Avraham Avinu says, "Va'anochi afar ve'ether." Part of his speaking to God was, he says to God, I'm dust and ashes, but nonetheless, I'm somewhat challenging you. Whatever good there is there, we have to save. So before Mashiach is coming, a Yid will be connected to the earth of Eretz Yisrael and to the ashes of the 6 million. Unless you are connected to both, you have no real connection to Mashiach. Very strong statement from Reb Shlomo. So he's saying this is alluded to when Avraham Avinu says, I am afar ve'efer. I am dust and ashes. So Reb Shlomo says this is the dust of the land of Israel, and this is the ashes of the 6 million. And then he says a very strong connection. He says, unless you are connected to both of these, you have no real connection to Mashiach. And again, this is ongoing theme in Reb Shlomo's teaching. He was constantly talking about the 6 million, and he was constantly talking about Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim. Even though he was all over the world, and he had a residence in New York, for a while in Toronto, but he spent a good 25% of his time every year in Eretz Yisrael. Not like just a 1 or 2 week stopover. And for almost 20 years, it was on the Moshav. That's where he would be. Okay. Okay, so now, we just don't have time for everything. Okay, so the last one it's on page 299. This is what we have time for. For those who have the book, the previous one is also really, really good. Would you go into the mud? Okay, this one is about prayer. So Reb Shlomo says the Ishbitzer remember he's quoting the Ishbitzer all the time, says that a dead person is someone who stops praying. Now, here, again, it's an illusion because the whole thing of the Parah Adumah is to purify us from the impurity of death. But here, Reb Shlomo is widening the implications of the Parah Adumah and is talking about life and death in a more metaphoric way. So the Bishbitzer says that a dead person is someone who stops praying. Do you think praying is only between us and God? Praying is between people. I can talk to my children, and every word is a prayer. I can talk to my wife, and every word is a prayer. On the other hand, I can talk to God, where every word I hear from him is a commandment. It sounds like an order, like a policeman. Never. This can be the way that I talk to my children. In other words, if I look at the mitzvot as an order and not a prayer, I might end up talking to my children like that, ordering them around and not as a prayer. He doesn't say it here, but I want to put it in. It's really a beautiful Torah I heard from Reb Shlomo. He said, when God commanded Adam not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then he tells his wife, Chava, this is what God said. We can't eat from this tree, and even added, and you can't touch it. And he thought that would be sufficient. Reb Shlomo said what he missed was he needed to pray over this commandment. He needed to understand that if he just took it as a commandment, well, a lot of us know ourselves when we were kids and with our children. So a lot of times you tell your children, or we were told what to do, and immediately want to do the opposite. We're teenagers. You have to rebel. And so what Adam missed is he had to pray to be able to fulfill that commandment. So that's what he's saying here, is that everything can be a prayer. And I usually don't like to pick on individuals, but I know that Brenda loves what I'm about to say. And this is a quote from David HaMelech from the Tehillim, where David HaMelech says, Va'ani tefillah, I am prayer. He doesn't say, I pray. He said, I am prayer. That is who I am. That's how I relate to God. That's how I relate to the world. I'm in a constant state of prayerfulness. That's what Reb Shlomo is really saying here. So he continues. The Mei Shiloach says, what is the difference between Mashiach coming and leaving Egypt? When we left Egypt, it was a little bit of a commandment. God says, prepare yourself, put the blood over the doorpost, you're going out of Egypt. So it's a little bit like a commandment. When Mashiach is coming, it says, Im b'chukotai telechu, if you walk in my commandments. So he brings that one of the explanations of the word im. Usually we translate it as if. I have to be honest. I'm not sure what his source is, but he says im also means please. So you could read it not if you follow my commandments, but please follow my commandments. God is talking to us and saying, I'm praying that you will follow my commandments. Reb Shlomo has a very, very big thing about God praying. But that is a different discussion. So he says, so when Mashiach is coming, it says, Im b'chukotai. Im means please. Mashiach comes and says, I'm the Messiah. I'm begging you, could you please come with me to Israel? In other words, the Mashiach isn't going to like order everyone to come to Israel. He is going to pray and beg everyone, please come with me to Israel. But listen to what he says now. You have to understand, Reb Shlomo did hundreds of weddings. He officiated at hundreds of weddings. If you've never been to a Shlomo wedding, you don't know what you're missing. The chuppah was hours. The bedekin and the chuppah lasted hours. And I'm not exaggerating the word hours. They lasted hours. So he says like this, you can tell your wife, meaning under the chuppah, Hariyat Mekudeshet, you are holy to me. When you give the ring, when the Chatan gives the ring, he says, Hariyat Mekudeshet li, you, with this ring, you are becoming sanctified to me. So he says, here is a ring, you are now my wife. I have seen those weddings. It's like a policeman who says, okay, now you are going to prison for the rest of your life. But on the other hand, you can utter those words as the deepest prayer in the world. In other words, he was trying to, in his unique way, he was trying to explain sometimes when the chuppah lasts 20 minutes and it, like you blink and it's over and it just, and Reb Shlomo didn't do weddings like that. Okay, you can say good Shabbos to someone like a statement, or you can mamash say good Shabbos, davening that they should be privileged to have the highest Shabbos of their life. Being in touch with death is not so simple. What does it mean to touch a dead body? There is something inside of me where a mamash gave up. It's like something inside dies, God forbid. So then he says, the Rishner says that if God forbid someone is dying and people would stand there praying that he shouldn't die, this person wouldn't die. Because as long as someone is praying for this person, they can't die. Now, we don't take that literally, but this is based on a story in the Talmud. A very famous story, a very important story, is that Yehuda Nasi, the one who compiled the Mishnah, was on his deathbed. And he was suffering. He was suffering terribly. But all of his students, they're so attached to the Rebbe, how could they not be praying that somehow he's healed and he lives? So they're all outside praying. And so it's really what Reb Shlomo says. Probably he's basing it on this story. And so he's not dying. And I don't know the relationship, but it was one of the women who were maybe a servant or a helper or a nurse, sees what's happening, and she has compassion because she sees he's really suffering terribly. And so she takes, they're outside praying. She takes a jar and she throws it out the window and it smashes on the ground and everyone is startled and they stop praying and Yehuda Nasi's soul leaves his body. It's a very, very famous story in the Talmud and it's used as a precedent. It's actually a very, very important story because there's a whole to this day, it's a very a contemporary issue, and it always has been, is what can you or can't you do when someone is in the throes of death? Do you have to keep them alive at all costs? It's a huge, huge question now, especially when they have technology that they can hook people up and keep people alive somewhat artificially for years, quite literally years. Unfortunately, we know of cases like this. Or what you can do passively. So in other words, this person who threw the jar was not directly doing anything to Yehuda Nasi, because that is forbidden. You can't do something actively to cause someone to die. But there are many, many indirect things that you can do. And this is one of the precedents. So I didn't mean to get into all of this, but when he makes this statement, if this is, I believe, where he gets this. So that's really what we have time for today. Since Reb Shlomo talked about having a taste of the Torah, I hope today we got a taste of how Reb Shlomo tried to give over the Torah.